Um, Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the Homes and Safe Communities Scrutiny Committee for Wednesday, the 13th of January 2021. There's just etiquette and introduction I'd like to read to you first. May I remind everyone present that the meeting will be recorded via the internet and this recording archived for future viewing. Could all participants mute themselves when not speaking in order to avoid any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking? If a participant wishes to speak, can they please put their hand up if they can be seen on screen, or use the hand up or chat functions? If any participant has difficulty hearing or being heard when they are addressing the committee, then they should let the chairman or the democratic officer know. If they have a webcam, then they should try turning this off, as this will help with broadband or Wi-Fi bandwidth, so they have at least can hear and be heard. And just to add that I'm joined by our Scrutiny Committee councillors, officers and other invited guests, including councillors who are not members of this committee, to assist with our discussions. I'll introduce guests later. Okay, thank you. So agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Do we have any, please, Mark?
Okay, Chair. I've had through apologies for Councillor Parker and Mrs. Gina Doyle, Mrs. Winnie Davis, and Mr. Anthony Raybould from the Tenant representatives. Okay,
thank you. So if we can go to agenda item 2, the minutes of the meeting held on the 9th of December 2020. A committee happy to accept those minutes and to take them as read?
Yeah, move the minutes, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I've got a few hands up there. Thank you very much. And agenda item 3, to receive declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest, please?
Yeah, I'd like to.
Is Councillor Aviat?
Yeah, I'd like to declare an interest in agenda item number 4, as I'm a council tenant.
Okay, and with that, obviously, you're still allowed to participate within the discussion and everything. Okay, thank you. If we can move on to agenda item 4, it's the results of the customer satisfaction star survey, which will be presented by Nick Jones, Vale of Glamorgan officer, and Adam Payne, ARP, the consultants who were commissioned to undertake the survey. So if you'd like to carry on and do the presentation, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair. It's Nick. Just to start off, I'll speak very briefly because Adam's going to do the bulk of the presentation. But we engaged ARP consultants on our behalf some time ago to carry out a large-scale tenant survey of all of our tenants and to find out levels of satisfaction, identify what we were doing well, maybe some other areas where there was scope for some improvement. So I think Adam's going to take us in some detail through the results, the key findings and the feedback. So I won't talk anymore at the risk of stealing his thunder, really. So I was just going to pass it across to Adam. Thanks.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thank you very much, Nick. Yes, I'm Adam Payne from ARP Research, and we did the survey for you quite a long time ago now. So what we need to do is I need to share my screen with you to be able to start this slideshow. So I'm just going to share this content now, and we will see whether okay, wrong screen, I do apologize. I just need to swap that across to the one where we're presenting from. 2 seconds. There we go. There we go. That should be the correct screen now. Because can everybody see that? It's the contents page and start of the presentation.
Yeah.
Is that visible to everybody?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. Right. Before we get going, I'll just mention a little bit about myself. ARP Research are one of the biggest providers of staff surveys across England and Wales, and we do an awful lot of work in Wales itself. So one of the advantages of being able to talk to you about the survey is that I can give you the context of some of these results based upon, across other surveys we've done, particularly in Wales, and as we'll go later in the survey, particularly as pertains to the changes since 2020, because obviously it will have affected the results. Because the survey we're going to talk about today was completed at the very end of 2019. And I was going to give this presentation to you March, April 2020. Now, as we all know, things changed a little bit, and that's why it's about a year delayed. So that's something to bear in mind whenever we're going through this. You know, this is from the before times, before COVID. So we've always got to take that into account. But nevertheless, you know, it's important that you see what happened at that time, seeing as it was so delayed. So I'm going to talk a bit of background about the survey first, you know, what we did, why we did it, then go straight into the headline stuff, overall satisfaction, and the key drivers, by which I mean those topic areas that really seem to influence how people answered the survey and how satisfied they said that they were. Then we're going to go topic by topic on the key things, summary, and then I think there's going to be time for questions and for discussion, everything like that. So without further ado, let's get going. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a bit of background information so you know where we're coming from. Okay, the survey that we did is based on the Housemarque STAR survey, which is a standardised survey used across England and Wales. Most landlords use it. It's available for benchmarking, and it's also the basis upon which the Welsh Government has set the specific target questions for submission to them every 2 years. So it's this standard framework that everybody uses. What we did as part of this survey was a two-stage postal self-completion survey, very straightforward. Every tenant got a copy of the questionnaire, and then about 2 to 3 weeks later, if they hadn't taken part, they got another copy of the questionnaire. They came back by free post. They captured all the results, and here are the, you know, we're presenting them today. What we're also going to do throughout this is compare the results against the 2016 survey to see how things changed. This is going to be even more relevant the next time you do your survey, because we've had quite a period of change in the last year. And to point out to you that obviously the Welsh Government is looking for landlords to be doing their surveys every couple of years now. So, you know, I suspect this will be a further benchmark that you'll be comparing against in the future. So that next survey up will be very fascinating, of course, because this COVID pandemic will have been in the intervening period. Now, what we're doing in the presentation is we're going to benchmark. We're going to talk about the benchmarks against the council's peer group within the Housemarque database. So that peer group is, I think it's councils, you know, it's district, it's unitary authorities, metropolitan, across England and Wales. And just to let you know, the benchmarks I'm going to be talking about here have been updated since we finished the report, because we provided the report obviously in late 2019. I'm giving this presentation in early 2021. A few days ago, we updated these with the most latest information. So if you see a mismatch between this and the full report, that's the reason why. So anyway, survey itself carried out October to November 2019, sent to everyone. Just shy of 1,400 people took part, and that was a 37% response rate. That's pretty good. I'm very happy with that response rate. We'd normally expect for general needs and general needs plus sheltered to be in the region of 35 to 40. It's often a little bit lower in South Wales, so I wouldn't have been surprised if it was under 35. So bang on where I'd expect it to be. The error margin, you may have heard this quoted in things about polling or when you see it on the TV. Essentially, it says how big was the sample and how much natural variability is there in the results just by natural error. The bigger the sample, the smaller the error margin. We've got an error margin of plus or minus 2%. So in really rough terms, very, very rough, I must say, any figure we look at it might bobble up and down by 2 below, 2 above. That's a really rough rule of thumb, and that just naturally happens. The error margin, which is the target for a star survey of your size, is plus or minus 4%. So it's a much more accurate survey than the minimum you needed. And the other thing I'll point out is that we took the results. I'm getting a bit of feedback here from somebody. I don't know whether anyone else is getting that feedback. I think there might be somebody unmuted. There we go. So the...
Sorry, Adam, I just reiterate, if anyone has got their mics on, can they make sure they're muted, please?
Right. Okay. So the only other thing I'll point out is that in postal surveys like this, the people who send back the survey are not necessarily representative of the population as a whole. So what you do in research such as this is you weight the data to be to better match the demographics of the population that you were researching. So this survey, the final sample has been weighted by both area and stock type. So that's sheltered versus general needs, in order to make it more representative and better reflective of the tenant population. However, it wasn't weighted by age, and that is a factor we'll talk about as we go through the presentation. So bear that in mind. We're not representative by age, and that could be a factor in your results, particularly in subsequent surveys. But this methodology perfectly matches what was done in 2016. So it matches like for like, absolutely precisely with 2016. So, okay, so that's the preamble. Let's get straight into the nitty gritty. How satisfied are tenants overall with the service provided by the council as their landlord? And by the way, we're very specific to ask about the service you provide as a landlord rather than any other services by the council. This survey, and along with all of the tenant satisfaction surveys across the sector, use 5 points on a scale, from very satisfied to very dissatisfied, and you can see in the graph above. We look at every point on that scale, but the way we summarise the results across the sector is to add together the proportion of people who were either very or fairly satisfied. So it's the positive versus everybody else. And the number of people the proportion who were satisfied was 84%, which is above the result in 2016, which was 81%. Now you'll see I've got a little symbol there. It's a little triangle. Now, on all of these results, when we're looking at changes over time, when we're looking about differences between different subgroups in the sample, we run statistics tests on them that do those things to check whether it's within the error margin or not, and to tell us whether any changes are just wobbling around due to natural variation, or whether we can be statistically confident they're real and we can replicate them in the future. So what we're looking at here is we've done the stats test and it said, yes, we can be confident that this is a statistically significant improvement. So great news. Compared to 2016, it's gone up. And also you can see the benchmark from the peer group of other councils is 84%. So again, the council is bang on par where it needs to be, and it is significantly improved since 2016. So the headline result is very positive. You know, it's definitely got better. Just one other note on these statistical tests. I'm going to be mentioning as we go through about those statistical tests, but be aware when we do those tests, we compare the pattern of the points on all 5 points on the scale. We might summarize it as percentage positive, but the statistical test is actually the relationship between those 5 points. So sometimes you might see a result that looks like it's quite big, but it's not statistically significant. And that might be because relatively few people answered the question, or it might be because even though there's a big gap, some of the other results have changed in the opposite direction. So the statistical test essentially sort the wheat from the chaff for us. So we just do a certain amount of relying on, okay, these are the ones we really want. Okay, so results went up. That's great. Why did they go up? Well, we're pretty confident that there are improvements in how day-to-day repairs were rated. And that's always such a central part of any of the surveys that we do. And so when repairs get better, you typically find overall satisfaction gets better. And that was the case here. We had some improvements in day-to-day repair scores, and they're reflected in the overall satisfaction. So that is a credit to. Oh, we've got someone else not on mute. Anyway, I'll keep on going. So that's the one component, and we've also seen some other statistically significant improvements in what people thought of their neighbourhoods and how the council handles reports of antisocial behaviour. So broadly speaking, if you're going to go away with nothing else from these results, yeah, it went up. It's about on par with what we'd expect it to be, and there's been some improvements in day-to-day repairs, neighbourhoods, and ASB. That's great. We'd also point out that the improvement of overall satisfaction is from 81 to 84, so that's 3 points. But there's a 5% improvement in the very satisfied. So that's really helped it to be significant. So, it's a solid improvement. I'm very happy to say that since 2016, 2019, the results are better. But that's not to say there aren't people who are still dissatisfied. 1 in 10 are still dissatisfied, and you can't forget that. 11%. Had some sort of complaint about it. Now, whilst that's not atypical, you still shouldn't forget that there's 1 in 10 people who weren't happy with the services. Okay, so let's talk about this in more detail. The first thing I really need to draw your attention to is this chart here, which shows you satisfaction by age group. It's quite a dramatic chart. 18 to 24-year-olds, there weren't that many of them in the sample mind. Only 44% were actively satisfied. Only 59% of the 25 to 34-year-olds, and only 70% of the 35 to 44-year-olds. So throughout the rest of the presentation, remember that chart, because it will apply to virtually all of the other results. So sometimes I could be fairly dismissive of some of the findings. I might say, oh yeah, there's a difference by area. Oh, is that really interesting? It might be, well, it's probably to do with the age profile. Most things in the survey results will be down to the age profile. I'm not saying all of them are, but it's very dramatic. That's not to say that this isn't common. Older tenants being more satisfied than younger tenants is by far and away the runs throughout all star survey results. Some, though, are a bit flatter these days. They're still there, but it's a flatter one. But the results for the council are old school. We always used to see them that way, and they start to flatten out for our customers, but not in this particular instance. Now, you remember that I said that we didn't weight by age this time around. Now, because we did a postal survey and there was no online component, which is starting to be pretty unusual now, there were about 45% of the sample, I think off the top of my head, were working age. And it should have been about over 60%. We're 18% below the working age proportions. So always bear that in mind when looking at these results. It matches perfectly against 2016. So when we're looking at comparisons over time, they are very solid. But if you're looking about comparisons to what the actual demographic profile of your tenants is, bear in mind we don't have enough young people. And as you can see in that graph, that makes an impact. They have a very different experience of the service. Very, very different. However, on the flip side, older people are more satisfied. So 94% of sheltered were satisfied. The satisfaction for sheltered components is very, very high. Those people are very, very happy. And another thing, which is starting a strand of results we'll pick up throughout the slides, is that tenants who had recently made contact were significantly less satisfied overall than tenants that had not. So that's 82% versus 89%. There are some other differences by area. People in the Eastern Vale tend to be more satisfied. Those in Barry West and Barry East were less satisfied than average. And we did that on a stats test. And there are also some particular wards which were different. And they're on the notes if you want to look at them. But and there's further information in the report where it's broken down by some of these these areas. But bear in mind, a lot of that has to do with the age profile of that particular group. So rather than just look at those simple figures, we also did an extra bit of analysis called a key driver analysis. Now that's just a approachable name for doing an regression statistical analysis on the data. I don't need to explain that in any great detail other than say it's a statistical test that looks through all of the other satisfaction statements throughout the survey and finds those which are the best predictors of how the respondents will answer that overall satisfaction question. So this is the best predictors statistically of how they'll answer that question. We haven't got figures on the top of these bars because they're a coefficient variant, they aren't percentages, so we don't want to confuse matters. But the size of the bar is obviously relevant. But the best way to talk about these is in narrative terms. And this is a statistical model. So there's lots of statistical noise here. So don't take these as absolute gospel, but also take them as quite a good indication of what's going on in the results. And if you see them in that way, they're really, really useful. Now, what we can see, first of all, is the quality of the home is the best predictor. How people rate that, the best predictor of overall satisfaction. We'd often expect that to be the case. And that was also true in 2016. No changes there. It's all about the bricks and mortar. For the next three along, neighbourhood, dealing with ASB, and repairs and maintenance, those all have important relationships. But bear in mind, all three of those had improved since 2016. So, that's a good sign. I think it's good to see that those improvements were on some of the important areas. And that was impacting how people answered the overall satisfaction question. So that's good. Virtually equal to them, we've got a number of almost co-equal influences, was rent value for money. And the key thing I'd say there is not that there's any problem in your results, it's that it's becoming a key driver for everybody. It's so central to people, in the after austerity, and it's going to be more important since COVID. So that, I'd be surprised if that wasn't there. It's a wider issue than just Glamorgan, the Vale of Glamorgan. And the last one is how inquiries are dealt with generally. Now, it's interesting that that's on there. I might have expected it to be a bit higher. Oh no, perhaps not. Think about it, and I'll pick up that thread in a couple of short slides' time. But that's the main area where results had fallen. So that's we've got neighbourhood, ASB, repairs and maintenance. Good news. How inquiries are handled generally, that's an area for improvement as we come out the rest of the results. But okay, so let's start looking at some of the detailed questions. I will start on repairs because that's typically the most influential, and I think it's the most influential in this case. So, same question, different shaped graph, just to make it a little bit interesting. When we asked how satisfied are you with repairs and maintenance, about 3/4 said that they were satisfied with repairs and maintenance. Absolutely no change in the overall score since 2016. So you're asking, why are you saying it's better? Well, I'll come to that. Overall, the perception is very much the same of repairs and maintenance overall. So that's the full piece. So that's not just that last day-to-day repair you had, it's also the quality of the home. It's also the fencing. It's also that time I didn't have my heating repaired as quickly as I'd have liked 5 years ago. It encompasses everything. So that's pretty stable, that perception. It's stable since 2016. It's a bit below the average for councils, but not massively so. The Housemark Star benchmark is 78%. So it's there or thereabouts. But you'll see there's a chunk of people, 17%, who are dissatisfied overall. Now we then asked them how satisfied they were with the last repair they received. Now you can see in the little shout out box there, that result is higher. Day-to-day response repairs have a higher satisfaction score than everything across the piece. And you can see why that would be the case. It's often said, it only takes one bad interaction and with some service or any customer service interaction, and you might need 4 or 5 or 6 good interactions to make amends to that particular customer. But so on the last repair, satisfaction was 84%. So that is a lot higher. It's pretty good, and that is also close to the benchmark. Now, bear in mind this benchmark. I'll just note anywhere there isn't a little Housemarque logo, it's a benchmark from our own benchmarks, because Housemarque doesn't benchmark that particular question, but we've matched our selection with theirs, just to give you, a good bit of context. But what we can say is we're pretty close to the average on both of these scores, but obviously the last repair, a single response repair, is always rated better than globally. So if we look in those overall scores in a bit more detail, much lower overall satisfaction among 35, it's only 49%. Jumps up to 71% for the 35 to 49-year-olds, but that's still 5 points behind the curve. So that says to me that any differences by age, if you have more young people in the sample, this particular measure will be particularly sensitive to age. Right? So age is a big difference, and we often find that if you are economically active, you've got kids, you're rushing around, you've got a different experience of the repair service than if you are retired. So most tenants are retirement age are satisfied, 85%. You can see there's a couple of area differences, which may be related to age, may not. Those are the ones that really stuck out. Eastern Vale area was significantly higher than average. Barry East significantly lower than average. Those are the standout differences by area, but they're a range across the spectrum. But those are the ones that stood out. So okay, overall, big differences by age, but pretty consistent. Why do I think that repairs have happened? Repairs have improved. The reason is because we asked a big bank of questions about the last repair that was completed. We didn't just ask overall how satisfied were you, we also asked about the details of that interaction. There were like 10, 11, maybe 12 questions in that big bank of questions. I haven't put all of them on here, but the satisfaction has significantly increased for every one of those questions since 2016 by an average of 5 percentage points. In particular, any of the questions on timeliness, about being told when workers would call, about making an appointment, about doing it quickly, they'd improved the most. And being told when workers would call was in the first quartile, compared to our benchmarks. So some really good improvements on that nitty-gritty on the ground, day-to-day response repairs. Even if it hadn't bubbled up to some of the overall results yet in terms of overall repairs, those nitty-gritty ones had made a big impact. And so I think they were very good improvements. And so we also did one of those key driver analyses that we've already talked about, but we restricted this just to satisfaction with the last repair, and we put all these 12, 13 other ratings into it, and what popped out was the most influential thing for how people rated their last repair was whether the job that they expected to be done was actually done. That was the strongest driver of satisfaction. That had the biggest impact. That's often the case. In fact, it almost always is the case when we do these surveys for other organisations. So it's not that I don't expect it to be there, but hopefully it really makes an impact for yourselves to understand that, it's so important to a tenant that what happens is what they think was going to happen. The second most influential was the quality of the work. Not a surprise again for me. And the third most influential was being right first time. Again, I'd typically expect those three to always be key drivers. But doing the job you expected right first time, they were on par with what we'd expect them to be. And being told when workers would call was quite a lot higher, and that was the fourth highest key driver. So all in all, what I took from those results was good improvements to that service, good improvements to the things that really needed to be improved, and very positive results relative to 2016. And I can see how they will have affected an overall satisfaction score that has improved. So great news on the repairs. So we're moving on to the other end of the scale. As I mentioned, contacts and communication is one of the areas where we need a bit more improvements, I think. Now, the key question, one of the key questions we asked here was, how satisfied are we with dealing with inquiries generally? Now, from the results here, you'd think, Adam, why are you saying that customer service isn't very good? That score's gone up 4%. And customer service actually is fine. That result sort of says it very much so. 80% satisfied compared to only 76% satisfied with how inquiries were dealt with generally. Pretty close to the benchmark mark from other similar organisations. So that looks okay. The key thing is when we ask people whether it's easy to get hold of the right person, that had fallen by 6%, and that was 9% below the ARP benchmark median. And interestingly, when we asked at the end of the survey any other comments, 1 in 10 people mentioned problems with getting through. So we had this odd set of results where overall, I think once people had their inquiry dealt with, it was positive. The results are positive. They're on par with what we need. It is a key driver of satisfaction, so it's important for people, but the standards of the inquiry handling at the end of the process is pretty good. And when we ask people whether they're satisfied with the final outcome or the ability of staff to deal with the query, they were where I'd expect them to be. With this being easy to get hold of the right person, and also whether the staff were helpful. Both of those had fallen compared to 2016 and were below our benchmark levels. So, and when we looked at the comments, there were lots of people who had trouble getting through and had long wait times, or were saying they were going to get a call back and they didn't have the call returned. So it was fairly obvious to us why those were outlier results. Similarly, there's a question about, it's a standard question on STAR, about whether the council listened and acted on the views of its tenants, as a landlord. Now, this particular question, it's an awkward question to answer, but what we tend to find is even though it was intended as a resident involvement question, most people answer it as a customer satisfaction question, about day-to-day transactional queries. And satisfaction for this question was also down 3% since 2016. So that's, again, it's the being able to get through to the right person, helpful staff listening to us was down 3%, even though some of the other scores were okay. Compared to the benchmark median for Housemarque, still good. 65% is the standard. So it's not like it was dramatically bad or anything, but it was starting to slip. And it was lower still for those who had recently made contact. So I don't think I need to labour the point. It's fairly obvious what was going on there. It's fairly common sense to see what was happening. A very similar proportion said they were kept well informed, 70%. So it all fits in for a similar narrative. We also asked some specific questions about online services, which are obviously part of how you communicate with your tenants back and forth, and that, as an issue, has been supercharged in importance in the last year, of course. Now, we didn't know it was coming, but this was very relevant. We're doing a presentation now over Teams. We wouldn't have been doing this in 2020, early 2020. But it's very important for you to understand what people were saying, in terms of what they were, how they were interacting electronically, which channels of communication they typically used prior to COVID. And I think this will have changed since then. But around 2/3 of the tenant, a bit below 2/3 of tenants, used the internet prior to COVID. Most of them did so via smartphone. It was pretty dominant. 68% of those users used a smartphone. Only 43% used a PC or a laptop. However, only 1/3 of those internet users had ever used the council's online services. So there was a big gap between who might use those services and who did. And those are the council's online services, for landlord, housing services. So only 17% of tenants had actually accessed your housing services online pre-COVID. But obviously, that's the starting point. We can see even in 2019, there was a big room for improvement. And I should imagine since COVID, it's going to have, there's going to be a big impact and a big change. Okay, moving on quickly to some of the other topic areas. We're going to be moving a lot more swiftly now. we'd asked about how satisfied people were with the quality of the home, and we saw that was a really important key driver of satisfaction. It's a dominant thing that really affected how people thought about the services you provide. 83% were satisfied. Bang on, exactly the same as 2016. Bang on, exactly the same as the Housemarque benchmark median. In some respects, it's really important, but I don't need to say much about it. It's there, it's consistent with your peers, but you can't forget about it because it's a central part of the services you receive. However, we still have these big differences by age. 90% satisfied for 65 plus, but only 57% for the under 35. So you can see this runs throughout the results. For example, we had low satisfaction in Western Vale area, but that might be to do with the age profile. There was an increase in satisfaction with sheltered, but it's a much smaller group, and so it didn't impact the overall score, or I don't think it was a significant increase. But yeah, virtually all the sheltered are happy with their homes. So, important issue, we don't have to say much about it. The other thing that was a key driver was value for money for rent. And we asked questions, we asked people how satisfied the value for money for rent and with service charge. Rent is a similar issue here than we just saw for the home. 83% again were satisfied, same score. It didn't change, and the median was 84%. So that hadn't shifted. It was where it needed to be. But it's important. So again, I probably put it in the same category as quality of home. You're doing fine over time, but it's important. Satisfaction with the service charge value for money was actually, again, similar to 2016, but that was a bit better than your peers. So that's, again, that's positive, not by a lot. The median is 71% satisfied for the council at 75%, but that's pretty good. We're happy with that. So other than the fact saying it's becoming common, it's something that's really important to people, there's nothing more really to add there, I don't think. But we did ask some other questions about people's financial standing to find out what the state of play was amongst tenants. And remember, this is in late 2019, so things probably have got worse since then. In late 2019, 1/3 of tenants had some difficulties in making at least one payment over the last year, including over half of the under 50s. So over half of the under 50s in amongst your tenants, they'd struggle to make payments. Now, of those who'd struggled to make payments, around half said that had impacted on their rent as well. They'd struggled to make that rent. So that works out as 1/5 of all the people who took part in this sample said that they'd struggled to pay their rent, 1/5. So obviously, that has links to your arrears levels and concern about arrears levels going forward. Similarly, we were obviously thinking about fuel poverty when we asked, were you able to properly pay to heat your home in the colder months? 1 in 10 said they couldn't. So again, that's a big chunk. And obviously, universal credit is a topic of interest. About 1 in 10 respondents said they were claiming UC. Of that group, we said, how satisfied were you with the council support there? Around half were satisfied, around 1/4 dissatisfied, and around another 1/4 in the middle. So, broadly positive, but not gangbusters. But then it's obviously a controversial thing, so I wouldn't expect that result to be particularly high. So yeah, people are happy with value for money that they're provided, but be aware it's really important to them, and very many are having difficulties making their payments even before COVID happened. Okay, the last little bit of the key topic areas, we'll talk about neighbourhoods, and now we're back onto the much more positive results again, because we asked, are people satisfied with their neighbourhood? Satisfied with their neighbourhood as a place to live? 90% said that they were. That's up from 88% in 2016, a significant, statistically significant improvement, because we had an improvement in the very satisfied as well. So people really were happy with their neighbourhoods. I suspect that's going to go up again because we found communal feeling has improved over COVID. And so surveys we've done since COVID, it's gone up further. You know, there's a big feeling of community amongst your tenants, and it's considerably higher than the benchmark average. So yeah, great results there. Satisfaction is very high. It's in the first quartile. Again, it is lower for those under 35s. You know, there's that age difference. Overall, it's great, but the younger people, somewhat less so. I've put a couple of areas up on the slides there that were the most satisfied and the least satisfied, just for a bit of colour. But everyone was at least in the mid-80s. So I wouldn't worry about any of those areas. Some were spectacularly good, others were just great. But you know, but yeah, there's nothing to say there's anything to worry about on any area by area basis. We asked a detailed set of questions as well about problems that occurred in people's areas. Now, you won't be surprised for me to tell you that the most prevalent problems, like over half of people said this was a fairly big or a very big problem, were rubbish and litter or parking. They're always rubbish and litter or parking. It's not a surprise that those are the most prevalent issues. What's good to see is rubbish, litter and dog mess, whilst they were still big problems, they'd fallen back a little since the last survey, so they had improved a little bit by a few percentage points, nothing dramatic, but they had got better. So, you know, that was good to see. But we did get some complaints in the comments about bin collection. And that was one thing that people often related to rubbish and litter. You know, it came up quite a lot in the extra comments, but still rubbish and litter was pretty good. So yeah, great results. People like their neighbourhoods. I'm not going to dwell too much on that because you know we'd be nitpicking. You know, people you know had some very positive things to say. But I also mentioned earlier in the presentation that satisfaction with how antisocial behaviour is handled had improved as well. You'd look at that score and think, oh, 63%, that's not very good in terms of a satisfaction score with how the council handles antisocial behaviour. That's actually really quite good. It's never particularly high, that score. So our benchmark is 61% for that, and that's for our own benchmark amongst the councils, that's not a housemark value. But the percentage who said that council handled it well was 63%, and that was up, statistically significant improvement for 58%. So it gone up 5 percentage points. So that's one of those other areas, and we saw that this was a key driver question. This had an impact on how people answered the overall score. So if you improve this, you stand a decent chance of improving that overall score, and we saw that overall score improve. Now, correlation is not causation. We can't say this is definitely why results have gone up, but you know, it's a good linkage, and yeah, it's a positive thing to see. We still had 9 and 15% who were actively dissatisfied. We had some differences by area, and satisfaction was a bit lower in Barry East. And it was a very important area of the service, amongst the 3 highest priority services for around a fifth of the sample. So it's a really important thing for some people, really, really important. There's a chunk who've had a bad experience, but broadly speaking, compared to other landlords, the score's pretty good, and compared to where you were in 2016, the score's good. Okay, those are all of the actual results from the survey in 2019 I want to talk about, but I've just got a couple of other slides for you, and that's because it's been a year since we did this survey. It's been a very important year, and so I want to give you a bit of context of things that we've learned having done tenant surveys over the past year that will probably have an impact on you the next time you do a survey. And hopefully this will give you an indication of what to pay attention to doing your next survey. And the first thing we found in the surveys that conducted throughout 2020, including a considerable number in Wales, I've just completed a survey 4 days ago. We sent some results to Taff Housing in Cardiff. We completed a survey for Tai Calon Housing Association just before Christmas. So we've seen the patterns change of the results. We've been able to track changes in the COVID experience as things went over 2020. And what we found is there's been some really big increases for a lot of our clients in any of those listening and communicating questions. Lots of our clients have made wellbeing calls. Those wellbeing calls have gone down amazingly. People have felt that the landlord listened, the landlord cared, they had a human interaction. I've seen that listens and acts on views question where we had about 63% satisfaction. I've seen that go up by 10 percentage points in the last few months for some of our clients because they've had wellbeing calls and it's gone down brilliantly. So I wouldn't be surprised if those scores improve for you in a future survey if you can keep that up. However, we've noticed since late summer, day-to-day repair scores are now suffering. Early on, people accepted that, COVID was happening. I'm not going to get the repair. They started to get impatient now. We noticed that across a lot of our tenants, our clients. And so I'd expect your repair scores to go down potentially. And bear in mind that can have an impact. We don't know what's going to happen with 2021, but be aware when moving into 2021, that listening and communicating and getting the repairs sorted seem to be those big factors. If you can keep on top of those in 2021, you stand a good chance in future satisfaction surveys. Another thing is that, as I mentioned in the outset, your survey in 2019 was a bit of an outlier already. We had no online component. And now it's even more of an outlier. I would expect in future surveys for yourselves to use online because virtually everyone is now. And it was sort of unusual in 2019. It's very unusual now. The other thing is that the STAR changed in 2020. They changed the methodology. They've added some questions, and importantly, they've made it clear that Housemarque members such as yourselves need to weight the survey results in the future to be representative, which means if you do the survey again in 2021 or 2022, you really should be weighting it by age. If we weight the survey I've just talked to you about by age, it knocks overall satisfaction down by 4 percentage points. Now, it's something to bear in mind when you come to doing your next survey, but from now until then, start to consider how you'll deal with that. The methodology of your survey will change. Like for like comparisons will be slightly more difficult. You'll have to do some weighting to compare. And if you did a representative survey by age, your satisfaction rating would have been 80, not 84. So, be aware of it now. Put a marker in the sand now. That's going to be an issue. But also doing online surveys, we found that we are getting young people to take part so much more that even if you didn't weight it, it changes the sample anyway. So, and one last thing is the new measure. There's only 4 measures now that are the important 4 measures in STAR, and one of them is I've put being the landlord being easy to contact is now one of the revised forecaster core STAR measures. I should say it's actually worded as easy to deal with, so it's a bit more expansive than easy to contact. It's easy to deal with, but bear in mind there were problems with getting hold of the right person, the phone calls that people reported. So if that's going to be one of the core STAR measures that you get compare against other landlords, really take that into account and be aware that that might affect that core STAR measure. So yeah, overall, great improvement in 2016. Responsive repairs improved. Landlords, ASB, great, they compare well. But there is that initial customer service with the contact centre, which will be fairly highlighted by the new STAR. There's big differences by younger and older tenants. Consider that when you think about anything about tenant satisfaction. Value for money, you're doing fine on it, but it's so important to people because so many are struggling. And the effect of COVID is changing so much. And bear in mind, the STAR methodology has changed as well. There's going to be some big shifts in the next survey that you do. So be prepared for that. Okay, so that is my last slide. I don't know whether we're going to do anything for questions or how the chair wants to go further forward from it, but that's the last part of my scripted presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam, for that presentation. That was very interesting. Do we have any questions that people would like to ask either Adam or Nick, who's here from the Vale Council as well? Sorry. Okay, I've got one person. Councillor Jonathan Bird, if you'd like to ask your question, please.
I don't know if Rachel wants to ask it because it was her question initially. I don't want to steal her thunder, but well, I'm on now. It is Rachel's question. I found it interesting. I was just wondering, it has been answered on the chat, but for the record, of what it cost and why we outsourced rather than do it in-house. So we've seen the answers on the chat, but can we have them on the video just for record, please?
Oh, was that what Nick's points that he made on the chat?
Yes, yeah, I guess it was. I was looking for a response from Mike or Nick on this, please.
Mike, do you want me to pick it up, or is it something you wanted to?
It's fine. There are a couple of issues. The first thing is that we've never done. This is the second survey, star survey, that we've done, and we've never done it in-house. The issue for us would be not only the capacity to undertake the actual legwork to complete the survey, but I think there are a couple of other factors, which is why we look to outsource it. The survey cost, I think it was around £12,000, and it's undertaken, as I say, biannually traditionally, and it will be a requirement, as Adam has mentioned. Welsh Government now make it a requirement in relation to receipt of major repairs allowance, and also in terms of the new Welsh Government rent policy, where obviously we need to satisfy ourselves when we're looking at rent that if we are looking to increase our rent, it provides value for money. But in terms of the points, one is the issue around capacity, but I think it's also the level of independence that an external consultancy can bring. We're not having to perhaps answer any questions, follow-up questions perhaps from our tenants about saying, well, the results have been rigged. You know, you've done the survey, you've set the questions, and you've provided the analysis. And I think the second point is, and I think as Adam has eloquently explained, there is a bit of a science around the understanding of the analysis, and I think it does need somebody with a specialist understanding, I suppose, across the piece. Otherwise, some of the plain information that you will have seen this evening could be read one way, where the actual statistical analysis is showing us leading us in a different direction. One of the other things I'd say generally about the STAR survey is that when we come to analyse the results, we also look in relation to the other housemark benchmarking data that we use. So the financials, the size of the service, the cost of the service, the efficiency of the service. So there's a bit of a sort of it's one measure that we take into account then looking at the whole service. I think it's probably fair to say that we concentrated, because of the results in 2016, on repairs. It's probably fair to say we concentrated on ASB because of the results in 2016. So it leads us in a direction, and I suppose there is always that balance between what services cost, how much we're prepared to invest in some services in order to drive the satisfaction figures. But I think the most interesting and pleasing thing for me is that overall tenants are highly satisfied. You know, 84% to me is an exceptionally good response for services, taking into account Adam's point around age profile. And I think there's a bit of work that we need to do there, perhaps on the back of these results, when we look forward to running the survey again next year, and perhaps a little bit further detailed analysis that we can do before then to really sort of delve down and understand, I suppose, what are the factors that are driving some of those lower age profile returns. So in summary, I think for me, the independence of an external organisation with the specialism of reading and understanding the results and doing that sort of evidence-based work is good value. That 12k that I've mentioned includes the postage and the printing as well. So, and that in itself took up a fairly significant bulk, I would say. So, I think for me, it's really good value.
Can I add one point in terms of costs to consider for yourselves going forward? Is, as we found with everything else, COVID has done many challenges, but also offers many opportunities. What we are finding with a lot of our clients is that it's supercharged using electronic means to do things. And it's enabled people to say, oh, doing something exactly the way we did before, it's not going to track over time very well anyway, because we've got this massive elephant in the room. Now's the time to think intelligently about, shall we make changes now to how we do it? So what I would say is, should cost be a factor for you? And notwithstanding that Mike says it was good value, I'm pleased to hear you say that it was, but it's very true the postage part of it is the majority cost. So you may want to consider how savings can be made, because a lot of other councils and housing associations make savings by moving towards using more online components, and sometimes potentially doing a smaller sample. We saw we had a 2% error margin, which was brilliant. We got some great results, but that was only half the size that we could target. So if there were ways of saying that, oh, we'll only post to the people who you don't have emails for, who you aren't able to text, you might have ways to quite seamlessly reduce costs, but also expand how you're doing things. So you have a lot of options for moving forward. And yeah, COVID does have some of these silver linings as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cave, I think you would like to ask a question as well.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Adam, for the information you provided us with this evening. I've got a couple of points. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to skip off in a little while to a community council meeting that I've got scheduled for this evening. But this has been very informative. I just want to ask a couple of points. So I've written them down in various places. First of all, I hear what you say about good value for money, and I'm sure that the survey is in some ways good value for money, and thank you for suggesting ways that we can save money. But one of the things that I used to do in a previous work commitment is I used to train people, lay people, to undertake research into areas that were particularly of interest to themselves. And I just wonder why we're not training, and you would have some skills to train people, or we could acquire those skills somehow, why we're not training some of our own tenants to collect data, to pose the initial questions, and to look at the results and put them into terms that, lay terms that could be relevant to those people that we're collecting the data from in the first place. So I do think there could be a little bit of room here for us to train some tenants of our own, and for them to be more active in the research role. The other questions I had, one of them was related to the Western Vale, which I have a particular interest in. And I was just going to ask you, you said there was variations across wards, and I'd be particularly interested to know why the Western Vale, in your opinion, it wasn't as satisfied. And then finally, I had, I suppose it's a long-standing idea that I've had, that when landlords, we're a big landlord, aren't we? When we collect rents, one of the things that we should be asked to do is calculate the percentage of profit that we make on that rent, as every landlord, I think, should be asked to do. And then once we can assess properly how much we're actually making per renter profit, and when we take all of those other things out, the maintenance and so on and so forth, administration costs, whatever profit is left, I think it should be incumbent on the person that is renting, either in a private or public capacity, as we are, to give back a small percentage of that rent in the form of a bond or some sort of security that that renter can then draw on going forward. So I think it would possibly cover our renters when they fall into hard times and can't meet their rent, or it could cover them if they should ever want to change properties and need a deposit to go elsewhere, or if they could accumulate enough in this bond to possibly buy something of their own. So it's just a suggestion. It's an idea I've had for a little while now, and I know it doesn't come under your remit, but I know you did mention that one of the things that you found was that renters on hard times made up quite a percentage of those that replied to your survey. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so I suppose there's a split with the answers that may be given on here. I'm assuming that Mike might want to answer the last part of this question, but also Adam, if you would like to answer the other questions that Councillor Cave had.
Okay, so first of all, can I just ask you to say again which area you're most interested in?
Oh, sorry, it's the Western Vale.
The Western Vale, right, okay. Western Vale has about on par levels of age, I think. I would have to do, I'll have to do a little bit of extra analysis to double check that. I think probably keep people, we don't want to keep people on the line too long, but I'll pass that along to Nick. I'll have a look a bit. So it's the Western Vale area. Okay.
Would it help if I picked up the first
yeah.
Okay. Because I can say it's an interesting concept, really. Yeah. It's an idea about training residents to sort of carry out the survey, and something that we can have a think about and consider. And I think one of the things that we may want to do in terms of unpicking this information and getting into it in a bit more detail, especially when you drill into local areas to find out what the data is telling us on specific estates or in specific parts of the Vale, is kind of follow up some of the work with maybe smaller focus groups or facilitated sessions, that questions and answers, so that people can add a bit of depth to things. Really, obviously difficult at the moment with the restrictions about movement, etc. But there's definitely potential for do that, and it's a great trigger, I think, for people to get involved, because very often we ask ourselves, "Oh, why would you get involved?" So this is a great sort of foot into doing that. It might run nicely alongside our time banking scheme, where we're always looking for people to volunteer and do things. So possibly we could incentivize that. And it also sits alongside one of our other community investment initiatives as well, about employability and training. So there's a number of crossovers and links there. I don't see it necessarily replacing the main STAR survey, which tends to be sort of a larger survey there, but definitely it may be a role for tenants to volunteer in their local areas to unpick and take part in focus groups and continue that conversation, really.
I would very much like to add to that. I think that's the perfect way to look at this, because a lot of research and customer satisfaction about closing the loop is about, you ask people about how satisfied are you, and you don't want to leave it there because everyone thinks it's gone into a black hole. What you want to do is to continue that conversation and to say, okay, this is what we told you, this is what you told us. We've got some numbers, we've done some statistics, and it's hard to do training and statistics like that, which is it's quite high level stuff. But what you do is you say, okay, these are the statistics we've collected, but we don't know why. And what we need is we need more information why. So I think Nick's suggestion is a very good way of involving tenants in ways that have got more transferable skills as well, things like facilitation and understanding the basic results there. One thing I would say in terms of field work and the nitty-gritty, very few people now do interviews, face-to-face interviews. That used to be one of the ways we could involve local tenants, is doing face-to-face interviews, and we used to do training on that and involve people. Very few people now do face-to-face interviews for this type of work, and with COVID, doesn't happen at all. And what we did find was it was quite hard to reliably collect data in that fashion, that we could rely on the data. So what I probably would, say that Nick's suggestion is probably the most realistic way of being able to involve tenants and improve capacity, because much of the rest of it is quite highly skilled and automated. And it's quite hard to involve people in those processes because it doesn't need very many people. It only needs a couple of people quite often to do that sort of stuff at a very high level.
Yeah. Can I say that was exactly my point, that there are a few things that somebody needs to input into a machine or a statistical package. They need to press a button and they need to find out at the end of it what that means. It's not a major part of the research that you're undertaking here. And I sort of slightly disagree with you. I do think that that you have a group of tenants that could well be able to help you in that interpretation. I think there's a great opportunity here to involve our tenants in another way that could really, as you say, close that loop, and most particularly, answer questions that I've got myself. So why are the older tenants more likely to say they're satisfied? You said, well, there's possibly a link between the satisfaction with the property, the quality of the property. I actually think older people, they get a bit fed up with trying to make change, and so they're sometimes more easily satisfied, and also they're sometimes quite frightened that if they rock the boats, that they might, something might happen to them. So again, if you were to recruit some researchers from your tenants, you would find some, I think, more pertinent answers to some of the questions that remain from this survey.
Yeah, that's the important thing to do. Is you want to add quantitative research and qualitative research, and so they should complement each other, not be separate. So when you have raw data, you also, exactly as you said, you need to hang on the qualitative. Why is that? But on the flip side, if you just do the why is that without having the raw data, you don't know how representative those views are. So merging them both together is sort of the gold standard to be able to really contextualize those results. We did a little bit of it because we had an extra question on the survey about any other comments, but that's only dipping a toe in the water. The way to properly contextualize it is some of that extra qualitative research.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam. Thank you for those questions as well. Mike, did you want to answer the third question that Councillor Cave had? And if anybody else has any other questions as well, if they can indicate. I think we lost you there, Mike, just slightly. Okay.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back now.
Okay. I think I just ought to clarify the issue. We don't actually make any profit on our rents. Clearly, we have a housing revenue account. The housing revenue account is ring-fenced. So the rents, together with the service charges pay for what the actual service costs. So we do a calculation at the end of the year in terms of what the full cost of the service was for the preceding year, and it's that charge then that tenants pay going forward. So they only actually ever pay for the cost of the service. In terms of the rent, clearly the rent will pay for management, repairs and the like, but the rent also pays for obviously our capital loans, for our new build programme, for the significant investment that we've made in WHQS and the condition of our properties. What an element of the housing revenue account also caters for is bad debt provision. So in the event that clearly our tenants do fall on bad times, we also take account within the revenue account bad debt. The other thing that we also do is that if there is a surplus, and it's not a profit, but if there is a surplus on the housing revenue account at the end of the year, we use that surplus to reduce our borrowing. So the borrowing that we make in terms of funding all the major capital works that we do, any underspend or surplus on the housing revenue account is either reinvested into services or as I say, it reduces the council's borrowing, capital borrowing, housing department's borrowing. So the concept of using an element of the rent and putting that aside for some tenants is an interesting one. And there have been discussions with Welsh governments, and I know its proposals have been put forward with Welsh government, particularly with the right to buy, which came to an end year before last now, wasn't it? That, you know, how do you assist people who aspire to be owner occupiers? And there are some investments that Welsh government have made in things like rent to buy, and the work that they're doing with some of the new, the new developments, new house builder developments. Some RSLs, for example, offer that opportunity as well on new developments. So in summary, what I'd be saying is that we don't aim to make a profit from our tenants. If there is a surplus at the end of the year, and that hasn't been invested into services or capital repayments, as I say, it's held within the housing revenue account, and sometimes will be used to reduce our capital borrowing for our improvements that we are making.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much, Mike. So, Nick, I don't know whether you had anything that you wanted to add to any of the presentation or anything like that. I realise that you haven't, I haven't asked you to come in that much, but I don't know if there was anything you wanted to add before we move on.
No, I think Mike has sort of summarised some of it in his opening comments, really. And yeah, we're just sort of always keen to get better. We want to improve services. We want to improve tenant experiences. So it's good to see the feedback of things that people that when we're doing it well. But there's also certain things in there where we can get better and target on. And the digital services is a definite area. Adam mentioned the survey being posted, and that was a decision that we had made at the time, and it was based on the fact that I think there was just 17% of tenants were saying they actually accessed us digital services via us at that point. So although there was higher levels of people using the internet across the tenants base, only 17% of them were accessing landlord services via that route. So, as we get more people online, and we have rolled out in the last sort of 2 years a customer portal which enables tenants to register, access their rent account, check their balance, update their details, things like that. And we want to build on that and get more people interacting with us online, really, because especially when things like COVID come around and people can't get out and about and visit people and go to homes, things like the digital offering is going to become more and more important. So this is a sort of a springboard towards that, really.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Nick. I think we've had some interesting questions around, the survey. We understand now that obviously it's the independence of the survey that's important for us to undertake, and to also have somebody who and a company that specialises in the gathering of statistical information and then can interpret it back to us. Also, I think Adam Payne, you're going to come back to us on the Western Vale question as well. You report to the democratic officer, send the information to them.
Nick, I will send some information to Nick on a bit of extra analysis on the Western Vale.
And I can forward that to Mark then. So
okay, thank you very much. So I think are we happy to note this report, everybody? Note the presentation. Yes. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much. If we can move on to agenda item 5. This is the revenue and capital monitoring for the period of 1st of April to the 30th of November 2020, and we have Laura Davis, the Finance Support Manager, who will be presenting.
Thank you, Chair. Evening all. So this report shows the position against the now revised revenue budgets, and all are forecasting a break-even position at year end, albeit some may need to draw down from reserves to achieve that position. As members are aware, the authority has been able to claim lost income and increased costs incurred due to the impact of COVID-19, and that's certainly been a lifeline for several of these budgets. As an example, Welsh Government's funded the costs of housing our homeless tenants during the pandemic through to the end of March. But should this funding not continue as it has to date beyond April, the service definitely will not be able to contain costs within its existing revenue budget. Thankfully, the Disabled Facilities Grant budget has benefited from a successful claim for lost fee income from Welsh Government. So earlier concerns that we had that budget would not achieve a balanced budget thankfully have passed. One of the budgets that will definitely need to draw down from reserves, though, is the CCTV service, which we know cannot meet its savings target this year. And another is the rent allowance budget. And we're anticipating up to £230,000 drawdown from the Welfare Reform Reserve as a result of the impact of the welfare reform rollout. As far as capital is concerned, all the projects are listed on Appendix 1, showing the projects plus actual spends and budgets for each. And the report refers to the inclusion, as approved by Cabinet in November, of a project to deliver temporary accommodation in response to the homelessness crisis caused by the pandemic at the Court Road Depot site. And this project is part funded by Welsh Government and is included under the new build heading in Appendix 1, which is showing £8.69 million. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Does anyone have any questions on this report? No, I suppose one thing that oh, sorry, Jonathan Bird, I can see your hand raised.
Just a quickie, and it's not really to Laura, it's to Mike. Is could we have an update on the project at the council depot? You know, the Court Road depot.
Absolutely, Councillor Bird, and I think it's in our forward plan that we will be bringing that report to this scrutiny committee.
Okay, so a report to us another time.
Yeah, just a quickie though, Mike. Could you just give us a quick verbal two lines or something?
Absolutely, we've just entered into contract. The preliminary works have commenced. Demolitions, I believe, have now commenced, and the groundworks. And we are still on target to deliver the accommodation by the end of March.
Great, thank you, Mike. Very exciting project. I look forward to seeing that come true.
Yes, I think we all look forward to that. For Laura, I think with the I know we've previously talked about the disabled facility grants, and we have some good news on that there. Would you like to say a little bit about that for us, please?
Yeah, absolutely, no problem. I have been reporting earlier through the year that we were slightly concerned that budget absolutely could not balance by year end because obviously fee income was down as the chaps couldn't and the contractors couldn't get into the homes of the vulnerable clients. But thankfully, second time of trying, the Welsh Government has paid our claim for lost fee income for that service. So thankfully, we can now hopefully assume that they will fund to year end, so that service should recover and be balanced by year end, which I'm very grateful for.
Thank you. So if there aren't any other questions, I think it was the recommendation was for the committee to consider the report. And if we've considered the report, are we happy to note this report? And okay. And Laura, thank you for attending today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Okay, if we can move on to agenda item 6, and this is the impact of COVID-19 on Contact One Vale, and Tony Curlis, the operational manager for customer relations, will be presenting this one.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the chance to come along and let you know about the impact of the pandemic on our service. So many of you will know Contact One Vale as a contact centre, but in fact the service also includes telecare monitoring, blue car badge service, concessionary travel pass service, reception services, SRS, and the Armed Forces Advisory Service. And as well as that, we provide services to external partners such as Cardiff Vale Health Board and Transport for Wales. And many of these services that we support are accessed by those in our communities who are vulnerable and actually perhaps most likely to be affected by the COVID pandemic and restrictions such as shielding and isolation. So those customers may be accessing adult social care assessments, accessing help with housing and homelessness, or registrars, for example. And at the beginning of the pandemic, like most of the council, our focus has been on ensuring that we could continue to support those most vulnerable residents and those in crisis. So the report sets out how COVID impacted on our ability to deliver services and what we did to counter the impact, and also how we as a service responded to support our residents when they needed us. So we initially identified our highest risk was the potential loss of high numbers of staff to COVID infection, as having a bigger impact on our ability to support residents. And so we initially divided the staff group into 2 separate sites to spread that risk before eventually moving to home working. At the same time, we asked our residents only to call us if they had an emergency and to go online to access non-urgent services. In section 2.4 of the report, you'll see that this resulted in a reduction in overall call volumes by around 32% compared to expected demand. So very successful initiative. And although call volumes reduced by 32.5%, our overall demand stayed roughly where we thought it would be prior to COVID, because many of those services that were accessed online simply raised an email to the contact centre that we then had to deal with. And in fact, peak demand was for a week in October when we dealt with over 8,000 customer interactions. The one thing it did give us was an opportunity to manage our resources better, because we don't have to respond to emails immediately in the same way that we'd have to do with telephone calls. And the other thing is a great indication that there is a customer appetite out there to access our services online, and something we can build on to develop that. Working from home, so we have 95% of our staff working from home right now, did result in a number of operational issues which impacted our performance. So section 2.6 outlines the technical issues that were impacted on staff availability, and section 2.7 sets out some of the support issues that we experienced, and these were largely, well, I guess, people who work in a contact centre really enjoy that kind of team environment. We went from working in a big open plan environment where there were lots of support from colleagues. You're interacting kind of constantly with customers or colleagues, lots of support, to working at home on your own without that kind of immediate support available. So to try and replicate that, we created themed chats in Teams so that a member of staff could quickly raise a question, and either another colleague or a team leader could pick up on that and respond as quickly to that, so they could deal with the customer on the phone rather than have to keep the customer hanging on. We also were able to continue with real-time monitoring, so that would allow team leaders to identify potential issues quickly and offer proactive support. So if there was a call handler and their call was particularly long, the team leader could listen into the call and identify whether the agent was having a problem, and then kind of intervene to resolve that. Or pick up the issues at the end of the call with the team member to be able to support them if it was a particularly difficult call that they had to deal with. And then the other critical thing is just as we were changing, lots of other services around the council were changing at the same time. Some services were stopped completely, some were changed significantly, and because the nature of the contact centre means that we deal with inquiries across the vast majority of those services, we had to make sure that we were capturing those and making sure those changes were available to our agents so that they could provide the right advice to our customers, but also so that they could retain that kind of confidence in dealing with those inquiries. So these actions allowed the contact centre to maintain a first contact resolution rate of 85%. So we didn't have to refer on to somebody in the back office somewhere or transfer the call. We kept information, or we gave the right advice, and then the customer had what they needed and didn't need to be contacted again. A big issue during the period, even with those actions, staff absence was an ongoing issue affecting our service, and that really can be split into two phases. So section 2.9 sets out the situation prior to home working, so where we had staff who were either experiencing COVID symptoms or coming into contact with somebody and therefore had to self-isolate, but because home working wasn't resilient at the time, it meant that effectively they were unable to work, which contrasts with now. So if we have staff who've got mild symptoms or self-isolating, they can continue to work as normal from home. But at that time they couldn't do, and therefore that was a reduction in overall staffing levels. And then 2.10 outlines an emerging pattern of absence as a result of mental health and well-being issues. Primarily as a result of extended home working, which I touched upon earlier about the kind of change in environment and the change in support structures. So that absence peaked in October with an average of 5 full-time equivalents lost per day to sickness absence, and it peaked at 9 staff being off at any one time, which was a large percentage of our call handling resource. And as a result of those losses to that resource, residents during the period up to the end of December would wait for an average of 243 seconds to have the call answered over that period. 2.10 also sets out the actions we've taken to address those welfare issues with staff. So we've introduced welfare calls by team leaders to staff to make sure that they're in a good place, and if we pick up any issues, we can deal with them promptly. We've introduced weekly video calls to engender some of that kind of team ethic and support that they experienced in the contact centre. And as a result of those actions and some others, we have had most of those 9 staff that were off return to work, and currently we've only got 2 call handlers who are still off, and they're expected back in work over the next couple of weeks. So we've made really good progress in addressing those issues, and I feel that we're providing a really good level of support for staff right now. Difficult readjustment for us, big change, but I think we are now getting there. So despite those issues, the contact centre has been able to take a range of measures to support residents. These are outlined from 2.13 onwards. So principally, and the most important one, was the establishment in April of our crisis support line, which was set up to support shielding residents in particular to access food and medication. So we supported those residents who were having Welsh Government food parcels, for instance, making sure that they got a delivery where the deliveries were made, but those customers didn't answer the door to the people who were delivering. We made sure that we contacted them, and where they needed extra support or where we thought they were in danger, we would escalate that in the appropriate way, either through partner agencies, the police, or through adult services, for example. And the support, although initially started with accessing food, shopping and medication, it's gradually expanded to support with financial issues, support with mental health services, loneliness and befriending, homelessness, access to care services and general well-being. And that support includes direct advice and support with council services or referral to voluntary and third sector groups. And we work really closely with GVS and Age Connect in particular to make sure that that our residents are supported as best we possibly can do. And we replicated that service during the period with the introduction of a chatbot on our website. So this is a chatbot that is available on our new cloud contact center platform. We integrated it with our Bill Heroes database, which is a database of local support services for residents. So if a customer uses the chatbot online, the chatbot can interrogate the database based on what the help the customer needs and provide the customer with a list of different organisations that are available to meet that need. And if they can't find the right organisation or the right type of help, then they can initiate a web chat with a call handler during our normal opening hours. It's worth noting, though, that the demand on the support line has been very low for certainly the last 4 or 5 months of the year, even during the kind of firebreak lockdown and new lockdowns. Currently, we're getting 2 or 3 calls per day. And that's maybe because those who were previously shielding have already put in place support mechanisms to make sure they can get food and medication and support. Although we expect to see an increasing focus on general well-being issues as the kind of mental health aspects and the economic impacts of COVID begin to come more to the fore over the next couple of months. And we're working really closely with council services and external services to make sure that we create a service that's in place that can support those issues as best we can. Using the crisis support team as a single point of contact, it will allow us to measure the demand for those types of services and our response to them. So finally, I'd like to draw your attention to the support we've provided to vulnerable citizens across our region and actually across Wales through working with partners during the pandemic. So section 2.21 and 2.2 covers the work we've been undertaking with Transport for Wales and the delivery of the flexi demand responsive bus transport service, making sure that vulnerable citizens who rely on bus services and public transport are able to access shopping and medication in a safe and secure way, and also making sure that key workers who rely on public transport can get to work in a way that's safe and secure and that meets their needs. And then finally, the work that we've put in place to support Cardiff and Vale Health Board to establish their CAV 24/7 service. So created to protect accident and emergency services from the impact of COVID, putting in place a telephone triage service to ensure that the accident and emergency service doesn't get overwhelmed by the increased demand. So those are the key issues that I wanted to point out to you and the key bits of work that we've been undertaking to support our residents. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tony. Does anyone have any questions for Tony? I can't see anyone indicating at the moment. Okay, sorry, I've got Sally Hanks. If you'd like to ask a question, please. Councillor Sally Hanks.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Chair. Can I just refer to point 215 and have a little bit of explanation around that? 420 interactions a week seems to be quite a lot with artificial intelligence. I just wondered if that's something new or something that's been ongoing. Thank you.
Yeah, so the artificial intelligence obviously relates to the chatbot. We did see a high uptake of interactions from customers. We're working currently with the provider to get a little bit more insight about what those interactions involved. So, is it, did somebody start an interaction with a chatbot and see it right through to the end, or did they get halfway through and drop out? So I can provide more. We haven't got that information yet, but we're working with the provider to develop those reports. And as soon as we have that information, I'll be able to give you more information on that. But that is the number of interactions initiated by customers per week with the chatbot function.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think I'd just like to add that the household waste recycling booking online seems to be going really well, and that seems to have been a very positive thing. Thank you, Tony. Thank you, Chair.
Great to hear.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I mean, I can't see anyone else is wanting to ask a question. I think just a couple of things I wanted to sort of ask about. There's lots of positives to come out of this report, all the sort of hard work that's been undertaken by the C1V since the lockdown started, sort of the crisis line, the chatbot, the waste online booking system that has been talked about, also the work, sort of opening the civic office for reception for people who can't do things online and stuff like that. That's appreciated, and the sort of the A&E telephone triage system that you were just talking about. I suppose my question really is around the staff sort of welfare sort of side of things. So I understand, sort of had a lot of new staff started just before the lockdown came in, and if you just talk about around that, because obviously they were then, if they were working from home, it could be really difficult to doing the new job and knowing everything that you need to know.
Absolutely, and that actually has been well over a year of quite big changes for us, because on the 29th of January last year we launched a new contact centre platform. So staff had already been through a big change, learning a new technology. As it turns out, it is lucky that we did introduce it, because we couldn't have undertaken homework in if we hadn't have had that new piece of technology. So that's in our favour. We did have quite a few additional staff, as you said, that we recruited through February and March, and we did get quite a lot of in-house training done before we ended up homeworking. I think the key thing we've done to support the staff is making sure that the knowledge database is up to date and they know how to access it, because it's got answers to most of the questions they'll need to know in there. They've been allocated a dedicated team leader who they can contact and who will contact them. And obviously, when they first started with this, the contact was a couple of times a day, and then gradually as they build confidence, and we did kind of quality monitoring of their calls, because all the calls are recorded, so we can listen back to calls. We'd provide feedback and do coaching via Teams, and then kind of monitor again and see how their call handling improved. And of course, as we were feeding back that improving performance, then their confidence was building, and it made working from home that much easier, I guess, because they knew that they could deal with the vast majority of the calls that they were coming through. The other important thing is that we can closely manage what types of calls they get, because as a caller comes through to the contact centre, they will choose what service they want, and that is effectively a skill. So it might be that, for instance, we decide we're going to a new starter, we'll just train them up on housing first of all, and then we can configure their profile so they only get housing calls. So one, they've got that knowledge so they can deal with the calls, but secondly, it allows them to build up a bit of expertise and have kind of confidence that they're not going to get shocked by something completely out of the blue. Well, I say that sometimes they do get shocked by something that's completely out of the blue, but I think the key thing is they've got someone then who they can contact to try and resolve that matter. So yeah, those are the key things. In some ways, they reflect a lot of what we would have done in the if we had still been in the contact centre anyway. But working remotely does make it a wee bit more difficult. And I'm not saying we've got it perfectly right yet. We absolutely haven't, but we're much better than where we were, and we're working with the call handlers to make sure to identify what else we can do to kind of help and support
Okay.
them.
Thank you. I suppose my other sort of second part of that is with the sort of the COVID was, I don't know whether, and it's only sort of because you're put this in your report about staff sort of mental health and absence and stuff like that, whether occupational health was still available to people and whether they could access those things online then for the council services and perhaps externally if they needed it.
Yeah, absolutely. And the stuff that you know, I should have said that the actions that we took were in addition to the usual support mechanisms that are in place. So you can still access occupational health via the phone, and that service is still there. We still point people towards all the usual support mechanisms that are available as a staff member, you know, for counselling, etc. So, you know, we do point people in that direction and make sure they're aware of all the support that's available. We do you know, when people have been off for a long time, we do the usual check-ins, you know, the absence management policy. So yeah, I mean, we do all of that, and all of those support mechanisms are still in place.
Okay.
What I've mentioned in the report is kind of what we've done over and above
the
standard procedures.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I don't have any more sort of questions for you. I know that Councillor Aviat would like to actually come in at this point as well.
Yes, thank you for that, Tony. I'd just like to express my appreciation to the staff of C1V for their hard work and dedication to the people of the Vale. As a councillor and as a council tenant, I've always had a fantastic response. I had a repair done today as well, and if the person doesn't know what I'm talking about, they'll find someone else who does. And especially in these times, but could you please, hopefully on behalf of all our councillors, could you just express our appreciation? Thank you.
That is really lovely to hear, and I'll absolutely be passing that back to the and appreciate you taking the time to say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Aviat. Yes, as a sort of committee, we would like to thank them for their hard work and for the managers and the staff of C1V for keeping everything going in these difficult times. So yes, we'd like to do that. Yes, and I'm getting lots of other people saying that they would like to, they agree with that as well. So thank you. I would also, are we happy to note this report, everybody? The recommendation is to look through the report, listen to the presentation and note it. Is everyone happy to note? Yes, we are. Thank you very much, Tony, for that presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so if we can move on to agenda item 7, which is third quarter scrutiny decision tracking of recommendations and updated work programme schedule for 2020-21, and we have Democratic Services Officer Mark Thomas, who will be presenting this one.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. Hope everyone can hear me okay. Yeah, great, fantastic. Yeah, just obviously members will be aware that this is a report that belongs to the committee and is one of our regular reports. Basically, this report is to look at the progress that has been made in terms of recommendations and decisions. And it's basically to also confirm the committee's updated work programme for 2020-21. You'll note that we have a number of appendices with the report. The appendices A through to D really relate to the various decisions or recommendations that have been made over the previous quarters and previous municipal years. As members will be aware, unfortunately, and this is noted in the report in section 2 or paragraph 2.3, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, scrutiny committee's meetings were cancelled between March and July and only resumed in September. Therefore, there are no recommendations for Q1 of 2021. And only September meetings recommendations for Q2, hence why we've sort of jumped from Q4 that was reported previously for the previous year to Q3 now. Basically, just to give members a flavour of what we've got in terms of decisions, largely for the appendices A through to D, the recommendations or decisions have been completed. I will note for appendices, for Appendix C, we do have a few ongoing recommendations, but these have been updated. So, for example, the festival, which we intended to notify members about, unfortunately, that has been cancelled until further notice due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So that remains outstanding for 2019-20, and also for the report concerning the traveller community, that's still ongoing, and that's in relation to basically a report has gone through to the Strategic Housing Group, and sometime early in 2021 a report will be going to Cabinet, and subsequently this committee will receive a report or update on the progress on that. Moving on through to Appendix E, the forward work plan. This is seeking committee approval to be uploaded. Basically, it's a rolling working programme and obviously is subject to change. Quite clearly, there's been a number of changes and sort of delays due to COVID. What I would let members know, we've had recently an update from Paula Barnett in the Youth Offending Service about the report that was due to come next meeting in February. That will be now pushed back to March due to obviously ongoing sort of resource and COVID issues. So I do ask the committee's sort of approval as well, that will make that slight change on the forward work programme before it goes up onto the website. And basically that's it in terms of summary. So obviously we'll take on board any comments or questions that members have now. Chair.
Yes. Does anybody have any comments or questions for Mark at this stage? Okay, I've got somebody. Okay, thank you. Councillor Bird is saying that he's happy to approve. So are committee happy to approve the tracking and also approve the forward work programme? Yes, if I get a show of hands, or yes, yep. Yes, I'm getting that. Yes, the committee are happy to approve the tracking and to approve the forward work programme. So thank you, Mark, for that.
Can I just clarify as well, Chair, that as long as no one sort of says otherwise, they're happy for it to be, forward work programme to be uploaded to the website with the change that I mentioned with the YOS report?
Yes, are people happy for that to be uploaded and for the alteration, the amendment to be added to that about the YOS report?
Yeah, absolutely, I am.
Yeah, thank you very much, Councillor Bird. Thank you, everyone else. Yes, we're all happy for that to be uploaded and for that amendment to be made.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you
I don't have any other business this today. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. The date of the next meeting is Wednesday, the 10th of February, 2021 at 6 p.m. So thank you, everyone, for attending and for your contributions today. Thank you very much. Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.